Welcome to today's Triple Z. The Triple Z podcast is a daily program that you can use to help you fall asleep each night. Just turn down the volume, lay back, relax, and enjoy as you fall asleep. We saw that our podcast was topping the charts in Brunei, so we are going to read their Wikipedia entry. Let's learn about this interesting country in the dullest way possible. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to write us a review on your podcast platform and share us with a friend. You both might sleep just a little better at night. Our website is Triple Z, that's 3zs.media. You can also like and share our content on Facebook or our Instagram account ZZZ Media Podcast. Music for today's episode was provided by the Sleep channel on Spotify. Formerly Brunei Darussalam, State of Brunei, the abode of peace, is a country located on the north coast of the island of Borneo in Southeast Asia. Apart from its South China Sea coast, it is completely surrounded by the Malaysian state of Sarawak. It is separated into two parts by the Sarawak district of Lembang. Brunei is the only sovereign state entirely on Borneo. The remainder of the island is divided between Malaysia and Indonesia. As of 2020, its population was 460,345, of whom about 100,000 live in the capital and largest city, Bandar Seri Begawan. The government is an absolute monarchy ruled by its sultan, entitled the Yang di Pertuan, and implements a combination of English common law and Sharia, as well as general Islamic practices. At the peak of the Bruneian Empire, Sultan Bolkiah reigned 1485 to 1528, is claimed to have had control over most regions of Borneo, including modern-day Sarawak and Sabah, as well as the Sulu archipelago off the northeast tip of Borneo and the islands off the northwest tip of Borneo. Claims also state that they had control over Seludong, or the Kingdom of Manila, where the modern-day Philippine capital Manila now stands, but Southeast Asian scholars believe this refers to a settlement Mount Selurong in Indonesia. The maritime state of Brunei was visited by Spain's Magellan expedition in 1521 and fought against Spain in the 1578 Castilian War. During the 19th century, the Bruneian Empire began to decline. The Sultanate ceded Sarawak, Kuching, to James Brooke and installed him as the White Raja, and it ceded Sabah to the British North Borneo Charter Company. In 1888, Brunei became a British protectorate and was assigned a British resident as colonial manager in 1906. After the Japanese occupation during World War II, a new constitution was written in 1959. In 1962, a small armed rebellion against the monarchy was ended with the help of the British. Brunei has been led by the Sultan of Brunei Hassan al-Bolkiah since 1967 and had gained its independence as a British protectorate on January 1, 1984. The country is an autocratic absolute monarchy. Economic growth during the 1990s and 2000s, with the GDP increasing 56% from 1999 to 2008, transformed Brunei into an industrialized country. It has developed wealth from extensive petroleum and natural gas fields. Brunei has the second highest human development index among the Southeast Asian nations after Singapore. According to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, Brunei is ranked 5th in the world by gross domestic product per capita at purchasing power parity. The IMF estimated in 2011 that Brunei was one of two countries, the other being Libya, with a public debt at 0% of the national GDP. According to local historiography, Brunei was founded by a Wangilak Betatar, later to be Sultan Muhammad Shah, reigning around AD 1400. He moved from Garong in the Temburong district to the Brunei River estuary, discovering Brunei. According to legend, upon landing he exclaimed, "Brunei," loosely translated as "that's it," or "there," from which the name Brunei was derived. He was the first Muslim ruler of Brunei. Before the rise of the Bruneian Empire under the Muslim Bolkiah dynasty, Brunei is believed to have been under Buddhist rulers. It was renamed Brunei in the 14th century, possibly influenced by the Sanskrit word varu, meaning seafarers. The word Borneo is of the same origin. In the country's full name, Negara Brunei Darussalam, Darussalam, Arabic, means abode of peace, while Negara means country in Malay. A shortened version of the Malay official name, Brunei Darussalam, has also entered common usage, particularly in official contexts, and is present in the United Nations Group of Experts on Geographical Names geographical database, as well as the official ASEAN and Commonwealth listings. The earliest recorded documentation by the West about Brunei is by an Italian known as Ludovico di Varthema. On his documentation back to 1550, we arrived at the island of Brunei, Brunei or Borneo, which is distant from the Malak about 200 miles, and we found that it was somewhat larger than the aforesaid and much lower. The people are pagans and are men of goodwill. Their color is whiter than that of the other sort. In this island justice is well administered. The settlement known as Vijayapura was a vassal state to the Buddhist Srivijaya Empire and was thought to be located in Borneo's northwest, which flourished in the 7th century. This alternative Srivijaya, referring to Brunei, was known to Arabic sources as Sribuza. The Arabic author Al-Yaqubi, writing in 800, recorded that the kingdom of Muja, which is Old Brunei, was in alliance with the kingdom of Maid, either Mai or Majas in the Philippines, against the Chinese Empire, which they waged war against. In the aftermath of the Indian Chola invasion of Srivijaya, Datapudi leads some dissident Datas from Sumatra and Borneo in a rebellion against Raja Makatuno, who was a Chola appointed local Raja or the descendant of Seri Maharaja in Chinese records. The dissidents and their retinue tried to revive Srivijaya in a new country called Majas in the Visayas, an island archipelago named after Srivijaya in the Philippines. After the 10 Datas established many towns in Panay and southern Luzon, according to Augustinian Friar Rev. Father Santorin, recording in the Spanish era of this pre-Spanish legendary history that Data Makatuno or Raja Makatuno, who was the Sultan of the Moros and a relative of Datapudi who seized the properties and riches of the 10 Datas, was eventually killed by the warriors named Labodungan and Paber after learning of this injustice from their father-in-law Paberong, sailed to Atijan in Borneo where Makatuno ruled. The warriors sacked the city, killed Makatuno and his family, retrieved the stolen properties of the 10 Datas, enslaved the remaining population of Atijan, and sailed back to Panay. Labodungan and his wife, Ojadinayan, later settled in a place called Moroboro. One of the earliest Chinese records of an independent kingdom in Borneo is the 977 AD letter to the Chinese emperor from the ruler of Boni, which some scholars believe to refer to Borneo. The Bruneians regained their independence from Srivijaya due to the onset of a Javanese-Sumatran War. In 1225, the Chinese official Zhao Ruko reported that Boni had 100 warships to protect its trade, and that there was great wealth in the kingdom. Marco Polo suggested in his memoirs that the Great Khan, or the ruler of the Mongol Empire, attempted and failed many times in invading Great Java, which was the European name for Brunei and controlled Borneo. In the 1300s, the Chinese annals Nan I Ji reported that Brunei invaded or administered Sarawak and Sabah, as well as the Philippine kingdoms of Butuan, Sulu, Mai, Mindoro, Malalu, present-day Manila, Shahuchong, present-day Siacan or Zamboanga, Yachinotan, part of the Majas Kadachuan, and Wenjuling, present-day Mindanao, which would regain their independence at a later date. In the 14th century, the Javanese manuscript Nagrakritagama, written by Perpanka in 1365, mentioned Brunei as the constituent state of Hindu Majapahit, which had to make an annual tribute of 40 caddis of camphor. In 1369, Sulu, which was also formerly part of Majapahit, had successfully rebelled and then attacked Boni, and had invaded the northeast coast of Borneo, and afterwards had looted the capital of its treasure and gold, including sacking 2 sacred pearls. A fleet from Majapahit succeeded in driving away the Sulus, but Boni was left weaker after the attack. A Chinese report from 1371 described Boni as poor and totally controlled by Majapahit. When the Chinese Admiral Xingyi visited the Brunei in the early 15th century, he founded a major trading port which included Chinese people who were actively trading with China. During the 15th century, Boni had seceded from Majapahit and then converted to Islam, thus transforming into the independent Sultanate of Brunei. Brunei became a Hashemite state when she allowed the Arab Emir of Mecca, Sharif Ali, to become her 3rd sultan. Scholars claim that the power of the Sultanate of Brunei was at its peak between the 15th and 17th centuries, with its power extending from northern Borneo to the southern Philippines, Sulu, and even in the northern Philippines, Manila, which Brunei incorporated via territorial acquisition accomplished through royal marriages. For political reasons, the historical rulers of Manila maintained close cognatic ties through intermarriage with the ruling houses of the Sultanate of Brunei, but Brunei's political influence over Manila is not considered to have extended to military or political rule. Intermarriage was a common strategy for large thalassocratic states, maritime states, such as Brunei, to extend their influence, and for local rulers such as those of Manila to help strengthen their family claims to nobility. Sultan Bolkiah had extended Brunei's power to its greatest extent when it conquered Manila and Sulu, as he even attempted but failed to conquer the Visayas Islands, even though Sultan Bolkiah was half Visayan himself, being descended from a Visayan mother, and he was famously known as Sultan Ragam, the singing captain. His powerful musical voice was a trait he inherited from his Visayan lineage, since Visayans were culturally obsessed with singing, with the best Visayan singers often also being members of their warrior castes too. However, Islamic Brunei's power was not uncontested in Borneo, since it had a Hindu rival and a state founded by Indians called Kutai in the south, which they overpowered but didn't destroy. Brunei's dominance in the Philippines was also challenged by 2 Indianized kingdoms, the Rajahanates of Cebu and Butuan, which were also coincidentally allied with Kutai and were also at war with Brunei's dependencies, Sulu and Manila, as well as their mutual ally, the Sultanate of Maguindanao. The Kadachuans of Majas and Dapitan were also belligerent against Brunei due to them being the targets of constant Muslim attacks organized from Maguindanao and Ternate, a Papuan-speaking state in the vicinity of Oceania that grew wealthy by monopolizing spice production. Nevertheless, by the 16th century, Islam was firmly rooted in Brunei, and the country had built one of its biggest mosques. In 1578, Alonso Beltran, a Spanish traveler, described it as being 5 stories tall and built on the water. Brunei briefly rose to prominence in Southeast Asia when the Portuguese occupied Malacca and thereby forced the wealthy and powerful but displaced Muslim refugees there to relocate to nearby sultanates such as Aceh and Brunei. The Bruneian Sultan then intervened in a territorial conflict between Hindu Tanda and Muslim Manila in the Philippines by appointing the Bruneian descended Raja Ake of Manila as Admiral of the Bruneian Navy in a rivalry against Tanda and as the enforcer of Bruneian interests in the Philippines. He subsequently encountered the Magellan expedition, wherein Antonio Pigafetta noted that under orders from his grandfather, the Sultan of Brunei, Ake had previously sacked the Buddhist city of Lu in southwest Borneo for being faithful to the old religion and rebelling against the authority of Sultanate. However, European influence gradually brought an end to Brunei's regional power as Brunei entered a period of decline compounded by internal strife over royal succession. In the face of these invasions by European Christian powers, the Ottoman Caliphate aided the beleaguered Southeast Asian sultanates by making Aceh a protectorate and sending expeditions to reinforce, train and equip the local mujahideen. Turks were routinely migrating to Brunei, as evidenced by the complaints of Manila Oider Melchor Davalos, who in his 1585 report say that Turks were coming to Sumatra, Borneo, and Ternate every year, including defeated veterans from the Battle of Lepanto. The presence of Turks assisting Brunei against Habsburg Spain makes the subsequent Castile War part of the Ottoman-Habsburg Wars. Spain declared war in 1578, planning to attack and capture Kota Batu, Brunei's capital at the time. This was based in part on the assistance of two Bruneian noblemen, Pangeran Seri Lela and Pangeran Seri Ratna. The former had traveled to Manila, then the center of the Spanish colony. Manila itself was captured from Brunei, Christianized and made a territory of the Viceroyalty of New Spain, which was centered in Mexico City. Pangeran Seri Lela came to offer Brunei as a tributary to Spain for help to recover the throne usurped by his brother, Saiful Rajal. The Spanish agreed that if they succeeded in conquering Brunei, Pangeran Seri Lela would be appointed as the Sultan, while Pangeran Seri Ratna would be the new Bendahara. In March 1578, a fresh Spanish fleet had arrived from Mexico and settled at the Philippines. They were led by de Sandy, acting as Capitan General. He organized an expedition from Manila for Brunei. The expedition consisted of 400 Spaniards and Mexicans, 1,500 Filipino natives, and 300 Borneans. The campaign was one of many, which also included action in Mindanao and Sulu. The racial makeup of the Christian side was diverse, since they were usually made up of mestizos, mulattoes, and Amerindians, Aztecs, Mayans, and Incans, who were gathered and sent from Mexico and were led by Spanish officers who had worked together with native Filipinos in military campaigns across the Southeast Asia. The Muslim side, though, was also equally racially diverse. In addition to the native Malay warriors, the Ottomans had repeatedly sent military expeditions to nearby Aceh. The expeditions were composed mainly of Turks, Egyptians, Swahilis, Somalis, Sindhis, Gujaratis, and Malabars. These expeditionary forces had also spread to other nearby sultanates such as Brunei and had taught new fighting tactics and techniques on how to forge cannons. Eventually, the Spanish invaded the capital on April 16, 1578, with the help of Pangeran Seri Lela and Pangeran Seri Ratna, burning towns and raping populations. The Sultan Saiful Rajal and Paduka Seri Begawan Sultan Abdul Qahar were forced to flee to Maragang, then to Jerodong. In Jerodong, they made plans to chase the conquering army away from Brunei. Suffering high fatalities due to a cholera or dysentery outbreak, the Spanish decided to abandon Brunei and return to Manila on June 26, 1578, after 72 days. Before doing so, they burned the mosque, a high structure with a 5-tier roof. Pangeran Seri Lela died in August or September 1578, probably from the same illness suffered by his Spanish allies. There was suspicion that the legitimate sultan could have been poisoned by the ruling sultan. Sarila's daughter, a Bruneian princess, Putri, had left with the Spanish. She abandoned her claim to the crown, and then she married a Christian Tagalog named Agustin de Legazpi de Tonda. Agustin de Legazpi, along with his family and associates, were soon implicated in the conspiracy of the Maharlikas, an attempt by Filipinos to link up with the Brunei Sultanate and Japanese shogunate to expel the Spaniards from the Philippines. However, upon the Spanish suppression of the conspiracy, the Bruneian descended aristocracy of pre-colonial Manila were exiled to Guerrero, Mexico, which consequently later became a center of the Mexican War of Independence against Spain. The local Brunei accounts of the Castilian War differ greatly from the generally accepted view of events. What was called the Castilian War was seen as a heroic episode, with the Spaniards being driven out by Bendahara Sakam, purportedly a brother of the ruling sultan, and 1,000 native warriors. Most historians consider this to be a folk hero account, which probably developed decades or centuries after. Brunei eventually descended into anarchy. The country suffered a civil war from 1660 to 1673. The British have intervened in the affairs of Brunei on several occasions. Britain attacked Brunei in July 1846 due to internal conflicts over who was the rightful sultan. In the 1880s, the decline of the Bruneian Empire continued. The Sultan granted land, now Sarawak, to James Brooke, who had helped him quell a rebellion and allowed him to establish the Raj of Sarawak. Over time, Brooke and his nephews, who succeeded him, leased or annexed more land. Brunei lost much of its territory to him and his dynasty, known as the White Rajas. Sultan Hashim Jalal Alam Akhemadin appealed to the British to stop further encroachment by the Brookes. The Treaty of Protection was negotiated by Sir Hugh Low and signed into effect on September 17, 1888. The treaty said that the Sultan could not cede or lease any territory to foreign powers without British consent. It provided Britain effective control over Brunei's external affairs, making it a British protected state, which continued until 1984. But when the Raj of Sarawak annexed Brunei's Pendaruan district in 1890, the British did not take any action to stop it. They did not regard either Brunei or the Raj of Sarawak as foreign, per the Treaty of Protection. This final annexation by Sarawak left Brunei with its current small landmass and separation into two parts. British residents were introduced in Brunei under the Supplementary Protectorate Agreement in 1906. The residents were to advise the Sultan on all matters of administration. Over time, the resident assumed more executive control than the Sultan. The residential system ended in 1959. Petroleum was discovered in 1929 after several fruitless attempts. Two men, F. Marriott and T. G. Cochrane, smelled oil near the Syria River in late 1926. They informed a geophysicist who conducted a survey there. In 1927, gas seepages were reported in the area. Syria well number 1, S1, was drilled on July 12, 1928. Oil was struck at 297 meters, 974 feet, on April 5, 1929. Syria well number 2 was drilled on August 19, 1929, and, as of 2009, continues to produce oil. Oil production was increased considerably in the 1930s with the development of more oil fields. In 1940, oil production was at more than 6 million barrels. The British Malayan Petroleum Company, now Brunei Shell Petroleum Company, was formed on July 22, 1922. The first offshore well was drilled in 1957. Oil and natural gas have been the basis of Brunei's development and wealth since the late 20th century. The Japanese invaded Brunei on December 16, 1941, 8 days after their attack on Pearl Harbor and the United States Navy. They landed 10,000 troops of the Kawaguchi detachment from Cam Ranh Bay at Kuala Belait. After 6 days fighting, they occupied the entire country. The only Allied troops in the area were the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Punjab Regiment based at Kuching, Sarawak. Once the Japanese occupied Brunei, they made an agreement with Sultan Ahmad Tajuddin over governing the country. Inch Ibrahim, known later as P.N. Dato Perdana Menteri Dato Lala Utama Awang Haji Ibrahim, a former secretary to the British resident Ernest Edgar Pengilly, was appointed chief administrative officer under the Japanese governor. The Japanese had proposed that Pengilly retain his position under their administration, but he declined. Both he and other British nationals still in Brunei were interned by the Japanese at Batalintang Camp in Sarawak. While the British officials were under Japanese guard, Ibrahim made a point of personally shaking each one by the hand and wishing him well. The Sultan retained his throne and was given a pension and honors by the Japanese. During the later part of the occupation, he resided at Tantuya, Limbang, and had little to do with the Japanese. Most of the Malay government officers were retained by the Japanese. Brunei's administration was reorganized into 5 prefectures, which included British North Borneo. The prefectures included Barium, Labuan, Lawas, and Limbang. Ibrahim had numerous significant government documents from the Japanese during the occupation. Pangeran Yusuf, later YM Pangeran Sisha Negara Pangeran Haji Muhammad Yusuf, along with other Bruneians, was sent to Japan for training. Although in the area the day of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, Yusuf survived. The British had anticipated a Japanese attack, but lacked the resources to defend the area because of their engagement in the war in Europe. The troops from the Punjab Regiment filled in the Syria oilfield oil wells with concrete in September 1941 to deny the Japanese their use. The remaining equipment and installations were destroyed when the Japanese invaded Malaya. By the end of the war, 16 wells at Merian, Syria had been restarted, with production reaching about half the pre-war level. Coal production in Mara was also recommenced, but with little success. During the occupation, the Japanese had their language taught in schools, and government officers were required to learn Japanese. The local currency was replaced by what was to become known as the Pisang, banana money. From 1943, hyperinflation destroyed the currency's value, and, at the end of the war, this currency was worthless. Allied attacks on shipping eventually caused trade to cease. Food and medicine fell into short supply, and the population suffered from famine and disease. The airport runway was constructed by the Japanese during the occupation, and in 1943 Japanese naval units were based in Brunei Bay and Labuan. The naval base was destroyed by Allied bombing, but the airport runway survived. The facility was developed as a public airport. In 1944, the Allies began a bombing campaign against the occupying Japanese, which destroyed much of the town and Kuala Belait, but missed Kampong Air. On June 10, 1945, the Australian 9th Division landed at Mora under Operation Oboe 6 to recapture Borneo from the Japanese. They were supported by American air and naval units. Brunei town was bombed extensively and recaptured after 3 days of heavy fighting. Many buildings were destroyed, including the mosque. The Japanese forces in Brunei, Borneo, and Sarawak under Lieutenant General Masao Baba formally surrendered at Labuan on September 10, 1945. The British military administration took over from the Japanese and remained until July 1946. After World War II, a new government was formed in Brunei under the British Military Administration, BMA. It consisted mainly of Australian officers and servicemen. The administration of Brunei was passed to the civil administration on July 6, 1945. The Brunei State Council was also revived that year. The BMA was tasked to revive the Bruneian economy, which was extensively damaged by the Japanese during their occupation. They also had to put out the fires on the wells of Syria, which had been set by the Japanese prior to their defeat. Before 1941, the governor of the Straits Settlements, based in Singapore, was responsible for the duties of British High Commissioner for Brunei, Sarawak, and North Borneo, now Sabah. The first British High Commissioner for Brunei was the Governor of Sarawak, Sir Charles Arden Clarke. The Barisan Pemuda Youth Movement, abbreviated as BARUP, was the first political party to be formed in Brunei on April 12, 1946. The party intended to preserve the sovereignty of the Sultan and the country and to defend the rights of the Malays. BARUP also contributed to the composition of the country's national anthem. The party was dissolved in 1948 due to inactivity. In 1959, a new constitution was written declaring Brunei a self-governing state, while its foreign affairs, security, and defense remained the responsibility of the United Kingdom. A small rebellion erupted against the monarchy in 1962, which was suppressed with help of the UK. Known as the Brunei Revolt, the rebellion contributed to the Sultan's decision to opt out of joining the emerging state now called Malaysia under the umbrella of North Borneo Federation. Brunei gained its independence from the United Kingdom on January 1, 1984. The official National Day, which celebrates the country's independence, is held by tradition on February 23rd. In July 1953, Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin III formed a 7-member committee named Tujuh Serangkai to determine the citizens' views regarding a written constitution for Brunei. In May 1954, the Sultan, Resident and High Commissioner met to discuss the findings of the committee. They agreed to authorize the drafting of a constitution. In March 1959, Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin III led a delegation to London to discuss the proposed constitution. The British delegation was led by Sir Alan Lennox Boyd, Secretary of State for the Colonies. The British government later accepted the draft constitution. On September 29, 1959, the Constitution Agreement was signed in Brunei town. The agreement was signed by Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin III and Sir Robert Scott, the Commissioner General for Southeast Asia. It included the following provisions. The Sultan was made the supreme head of state. Brunei was responsible for its internal administration. The British government was responsible for foreign and defense affairs only. The post of resident was abolished and replaced by a British High Commissioner. 5 councils were established. The Executive Council, the Legislative Council of Brunei, the Privy Council, the Council of Succession, the State Religious Council. A series of national development plans was initiated by the 28th Sultan of Brunei, Omar Ali Saifuddin III. The first was introduced in 1953. A total sum of $100 million was approved by the Brunei State Council for the plan. E.R. Bevington, from the Colonial Office in Fiji, was appointed to implement it. A $14 million gas plant was built under the plan. In 1954, survey and exploration work were undertaken by the Brunei Shell Petroleum on both offshore and onshore fields. By 1956, production reached 114,700 BPD. The plan also aided the development of public education. By 1958, expenditure on education totaled at $4 million. Communications were improved as new roads were built and reconstruction at Baracas Airport was completed in 1954. The second National Development Plan was launched in 1962. A major oil and gas field was discovered in 1963. Developments in the oil and gas sector have continued, and oil production has steadily increased since then. The plan also promoted the production of meat and eggs for consumption by citizens. The fishing industry increased its output by 25% throughout the course of the plan. The deepwater port at Muara was also constructed during this period. Power requirements were met, and studies were made to provide electricity to rural areas. Efforts were made to eradicate malaria, an endemic disease in the region, with the help of the World Health Organization. Malaria cases were reduced from 300 cases in 1953 to only 66 cases in 1959. The death rate was reduced from 20 per thousand in 1947 to 11.3 per thousand in 1953. Infectious disease has been prevented by public sanitation and improvement of drainage and the provision of piped pure water to the population. On November 14, 1971, Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah left for London to discuss matters regarding the amendments to the 1959 Constitution. A new agreement was signed on November 23, 1971, with the British representative being Anthony Royal. Under this agreement, the following terms were agreed upon. Brunei was granted full internal self-government. The UK would still be responsible for external affairs and defense. Brunei and the UK agreed to share the responsibility for security and defense. This agreement also caused Gurkha units to be deployed in Brunei, where they remain up to this day. On January 7, 1979, another treaty was signed between Brunei and the United Kingdom. It was signed with Lord Cornwall Roberts being the representative of the UK. This agreement granted Brunei to take over international responsibilities as an independent nation. Britain agreed to assist Brunei in diplomatic matters. In May 1983, it was announced by the UK that the date of independence of Brunei would be January 1, 1984. On December 31, 1983, a mass gathering was held on main mosques on all 4 of the districts of the country, and at midnight on January 1, 1984, the Proclamation of Independence was read by Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah. The Sultan subsequently assumed the title His Majesty rather than the previous His Royal Highness. Brunei was admitted to the United Nations on September 22, 1984, becoming the organization's 159th member. In October 2013, Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah announced his intention to impose penal code from Sharia on the country's Muslims, which make up roughly 2/3 of the country's population. This would be implemented in 3 phases, culminating in 2016 and making Brunei the first and only country in East Asia to introduce Sharia into its penal code, excluding the subnational Indonesian Special Territory of Aceh. The move attracted international criticism, the United Nations expressing deep concern. Brunei is a Southeast Asian country consisting of two unconnected parts with a total area of 5,765 square kilometers, 2,226 square miles, on the island of Borneo. It has 161 kilometers, 100 miles, of coastline next to the South China Sea, and it shares a 381 kilometers, 237 miles border with Malaysia. It has 500 square kilometers, 193 square miles, of territorial waters and a 200 nautical mile, 370 kilometers, 230 miles, exclusive economic zone. About 97% of the population lives in the larger western part, Belt, Tutong, and Brunei Mara, while only about 10,000 people live in the mountainous eastern part, Temburong district. The total population of Brunei is approximately 408,000 as of July 2010, of which around 150,000 live in the capital Bandar Seri Begawan. Other major towns are the port town of Muara, the oil-producing town of Syria, and its neighboring town, Kuala Belait. In Belait district, the Panaga area is home to large numbers of European expatriates due to Royal Dutch Shell and British Army housing, and several recreational facilities are located there. Most of Brunei is within the Borneo lowland rainforest ecoregion, which covers most of the island. Areas of mountain rainforests are located inland. The climate of Brunei is tropical equatorial, that is a tropical rainforest climate more subject to the intertropical convergence zone than the trade winds, and with no or rare cyclones. Brunei is exposed to the risks stemming from climate change along with other ASEAN member states. Brunei's political system is governed by the constitution and the national tradition of the Malay Islamic monarchy, Malayu Islam Baraja, MIB. The three components of MIB cover Malay culture, Islamic religion, and the political framework under the monarchy. It has a legal system based on English common law, although Islamic law, Sharia, supersedes this in some cases. Brunei has a parliament, but there are no elections. The last election was held in 1962. Under Brunei's 1959 constitution, His Majesty Hassan al-Bolkiah is the head of state with full executive authority. Following the Brunei Revolt of 1962, this authority has included emergency powers, which are renewed every 2 years, meaning that Brunei has technically been under martial law since then. Hassan al-Bolkiah also serves as the state's prime minister, finance minister, and defense minister. Until 1979, Brunei's foreign relations were managed by the UK government. After that, they were handled by the Brunei Diplomatic Service. After independence in 1984, this service was upgraded to ministerial level and is now known as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Officially, Brunei's foreign policy is as follows: mutual respect of others' territorial sovereignty, integrity, and independence. The maintenance of friendly relations among nations. Non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries, and the maintenance and the promotion of peace, security, and stability in the region. With its traditional ties with the United Kingdom, Brunei became the 49th member of the Commonwealth immediately on the day of its independence on January 1, 1984. As one of its first initiatives toward improved regional relations, Brunei joined ASEAN on January 7, 1984, becoming the 6th member. To achieve recognition of its sovereignty and independence, it joined the United Nations as a full member on September 21 of that same year. As an Islamic country, Brunei became a full member of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, now the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, in January 1984 at the Fourth Islamic Summit held in Morocco. After its accession to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, APEC, in 1989, Brunei hosted the APEC Economic Leaders meeting in November 2000 and the ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF, in July 2002. Brunei became a founding member of the World Trade Organization, WTO, on January 1, 1995, and is a major player in BIMPEGA, which was formed during the inaugural ministers' meeting in Davao, Philippines, on March 24, 1994. Brunei shares a close relationship with Singapore and the Philippines. In April 2009, Brunei and the Philippines signed a Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, that seeks to strengthen the bilateral cooperation of the two countries in the fields of agriculture and farm-related trade and investments. Brunei is one of many nations to lay claim to some of the disputed Spratly Islands. The status of Lembang as part of Sarawak has been disputed by Brunei since the area was first annexed in 1890. The issue was reportedly settled in 2009, with Brunei agreeing to accept the border in exchange for Malaysia giving up claims to oil fields in Bruneian waters. The Brunei government denies this and says that their claim on Lembang was never dropped. Brunei was the chair for ASEAN in 2013. It also hosted the ASEAN Summit on that same year. Brunei maintains 3 infantry battalions stationed around the country. The Brunei Navy has several Ijtihad-class patrol boats purchased from a German manufacturer. The United Kingdom also maintains a base in Syria, the center of the oil industry in Brunei. A Gurkha battalion consisting of 1,500 personnel is stationed there. United Kingdom military personnel are stationed there under a defense agreement signed between the two countries. A Bell 212 operated by the Air Force crashed in Kuala Belait on July 20, 2012 with the loss of 12 of the 14 crew on board. The cause of the accident is yet to be ascertained. The crash is the worst aviation incident in the history of Brunei. The Army is currently acquiring new equipment, including UAVs and S-70i Black Hawks. Brunei's Legislative Council proposed an increase of the defense budget for the 2016-17 fiscal year of about 5% to 564 million Brunei dollars, $408 million. This amounts to about 10% of the state's total national yearly expenditure and represents around 2.5% of GDP. Brunei is divided into 4 districts, Dera, namely Brunei Muara, Belait, Tutong, and Temburong. Brunei Muara district is the smallest yet the most populous, and home to the country's capital Bandar Seri Begawan. Belait is the birthplace and center for the country's oil and gas industry. Temburong is an exclave and separated from the rest of the country by the Brunei Bay and Malaysian state of Sarawak. Tutong is home to Tasek Marimban, the country's largest natural lake. Each district is divided into several mukims. Altogether there are 39 mukims in Brunei. Each mukim encompasses several villages, kampong or kampong. Bandar Seri Begawan and towns in the country, except Muara and Bangar, are administered as municipal board areas, Kawasan Lembaga Bandaran. Each municipal area may constitute villages or mukims, partially or as a whole. Bandar Seri Begawan and a few of the towns also function as capitals of the districts where they are located. A district and its constituent mukims and villages are administered by a district office, Jabatan Dera. Meanwhile, municipal areas are governed by municipal departments, Jabatan Bandaran. Both district offices and municipal departments are government departments under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Brunei has numerous courts in its judicial branch. The highest court, though subject in civil cases to the appellate jurisdiction of the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, is the Supreme Court, which consists of the Court of Appeal and High Court. Both of these have a Chief Justice and 2 judges. The U.S. Department of State has stated that discrimination against women is a problem in Brunei. The law prohibits sexual harassment and stipulates that whoever assaults or uses criminal force, intending thereby to outrage or knowing it is likely to outrage the modesty of a person, shall be punished with imprisonment for as much as 5 years and caning. The law stipulates imprisonment of up to 30 years and caning with not fewer than 12 strokes for rape. The law does not criminalize spousal rape. It explicitly states that sexual intercourse by a man with his wife, as long as she is not under 13 years of age, is not rape. Protections against sexual assault by a spouse are provided under the amended Islamic Family Law Order 2010 and Married Women Act Order 2010. The penalty for breaching a protection order is a fine not exceeding BN $2,000 or imprisonment not exceeding 6 months. By law, sexual intercourse with a female under 14 years of age constitutes rape and is punishable by imprisonment for not less than 8 years and not more than 30 years and not less than 12 strokes of the cane. The intent of the law is to protect girls from exploitation through prostitution and other immoral purposes, including pornography. Bruneian citizenship is derived through parents' nationality rather than just solely. Parents with stateless status are required to apply for a special pass for a child born in the country. Failure to register a child may make it difficult to enroll the child in school.